My name's Dave. I have the privilege of leading us in our time of teaching today. So we continue on in our Atmosphere Matters series, which is our fall teaching series that takes a deeper dive into 14 principles for living out the gospel in real life. You can find these 14 principles on our website. We never preached on them before, but we felt like now was a great time to do that as we enter into this new chapter as a church, and so we're very excited about it. So we've kind of been jumping from different around in different places in the Bible. Today I'll be looking at 3 different passages, but the one I want you to turn to right now that we'll get to actually second in our list is John chapter 11. John chapter 11. So if you've got a Bible, you could turn to John. If you don't have a Bible, there's one that looks like this in the seat back in front of you, and you can open it up and turn to John 11, which is in the New Testament, written by one of the disciples of Jesus. It's a biography of his life, and we're going to be on page 953 if you're using one of the Bibles in the seat in front of you. So we'll get to that in a moment, but before we do, I just will intro the principle for today, which is lead with lament, and I'm adding to it. This has been happening as I've dug deeper into these principles, which we wrote several years ago. A second part to it, which is and long out loud. So lead with lament and long out loud, and I'll explain how those are connected and maybe help us. Now, some of us might be better at lament, some of us might be better at longing, but they're very connected, and I'll show you how they are. And to start, I want to actually read our first passage of the day, which is Jesus modeling for us both leading with lament and longing out loud. And so it's a beautiful picture that he gives of this principle. So I want to start there because at the end of the day, really all this series is about, really all the principles are about, are growing in Christ-likeness. So that is all being a Christian is growing in Christ-likeness. Well, why would we want to grow in Christ-likeness? Why would we want to be like Christ? Because Christ is God in the flesh, and we were created by God, Genesis tells us, in his image, but we've fallen so short of that high calling that God needed to save us, and he saves us not only by the cross, through the sacrifice of Jesus in our place to pay the debt that was blocking us from relationship with God, but we also need someone to show us what true humanity is, and so God put on flesh, the Bible tells us, became man and walked among us as the person of Jesus, born in Nazareth, celebrate that during Christmas, who lived a life that we failed to live and ultimately died the death that we should have died in our place, atoning for our sin and making relationship with God possible again, and also God-likeness possible again, which is to say Christ-likeness, for Jesus Christ is God in the flesh. So that's why we want to be like him. So we start here with him in Matthew 23. We'll throw it on the screen. You don't need to turn there. Matthew 23. So this is right, Jesus has come to Jerusalem for the last time in his ministry. They don't know it at the time, the disciples, but Jesus just begins this deep, deep lament, and I'll explain more about what lament is, but this deep sadness he has when he looks over Jerusalem for the last time, because he longs for his people to come and receive the gift of grace that represents in himself, and yet they don't come to him. They do the opposite. They end up falsely accusing him, arresting him, convicting him, and killing him. And he knows that this is going to happen, but what he longs for is that they would come. So the context of this longing out loud, this lamenting, is very important. So I told you not to read there, but if you wanted to go back, you could read them all. But Jesus speaks 7 woes over the religious teachers, the religious leaders of the day. 7 times he says, woe to those Pharisees, woe to the scribes, woe to those people who had the opportunity, possibility, and responsibility to tell the people what the Messiah, the coming Savior that the people of Israel had always longed for, what he would actually be like, and yet they miss their opportunity. They love their own power, they love their own wealth, so much more than they love God's plan. And so Jesus says 7 woes over them. And right after saying that, he says this. Jerusalem, he's looking, picture him looking out over this city, the city of his people, the city he came to, the people he came to save. He says, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her, how often I wanted to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing. See, your house is left to you desolate. For I tell you, you will not see me again until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And so you can hear it in Jesus' voice as he looks out over Jerusalem. He leads with lament. And really his 7 woes up to this point are verbal, public laments about how the people of God miss it so often. They missed it when the prophets came. When God sent the prophets, they missed it. Instead of receiving the word of the prophet for them to turn from their sin and turn to the Lord, instead of that, they stoned the prophets and killed them. This is nothing new, what happened to Jesus. This is what often we do as the people of God. And so he's lamenting, he's leading with lament. And then his lament, do you hear it? Turns to longing. How I long to gather all of you up like a mother hen gathers her chicks under her wings. But you were not willing. He turns to lament. And then he longs out loud. There will come a day, I know there will come a day, I will return, and you will say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. So he's longing out loud for that day. So I thought this is a good place to start. So you can see both the lament and the longing and how they're intermixed together. That's often how longing and lament play out. So a few distinctions before we get into it. What you might say, I've never heard the word lament, or I don't quite understand how lament is different than other things. So how is lament different than just being sad, right? Being sad or being sorrowful. So Jesus is clearly sad. He's clearly sorrowful. He's a little angry. He's a little frustrated. So all those things play into lament. But the difference with lament is it's being sad, you could say, out loud. It's being sad out loud. That's what makes something a lament. So it has been described, it's a passionate expression of grief or sorrow. A passionate expression. So the key here is that it's an expression. It's taking that heart state of sadness, maybe even anger, frustration, and it's making that audible for others to hear. So we'll see that. I want to make that key distinction up front because not only does the Bible teach us and God shows us and Jesus models for us that it's okay to be sad, and being sad is often the right emotion, it's taking it a step farther and saying God wants us to lament and take that sadness and make it out loud. Okay. Now, one other key distinction. So anybody can lament, but what makes Christian lament unique? Okay, so Christian out loud sadness is different because we are seeking to align our weeping with the weeping of God. So we weep for the things that we see God weeping for. We ask God to give us His eyes to see the same brokenness that He sees. And so lament, as we're talking about it, is not lamenting that your team lost the big game yesterday. Sorry, God doesn't care. I mean, He cares about each and every player. He may even give each and every player the strength, the endurance that they ask for. But at the end of the day, He doesn't care how the scoreboard ends. So we want to weep for the things that God weeps for. That's what makes out loud. That's what makes this Christian lament, okay? Now, how are lament and longing the same and different? So they're very, very similar activities, but lament is being sad out loud for something that is either past, has already happened, or is currently happening. Whereas longing is a future-oriented, even out loud sadness. So you feel it in Jesus. He's longing to gather his people underneath him. That's why it's in the future. That's why it's out loud longing versus when he sees what they've done to the prophets and what they're going to do to him presently. That is his lament. And so the reason I wanted to add long out loud, which is a new way of saying LOL, by the way, if you hadn't picked up on that yet, LOL, let's long out loud, is that I found myself almost being, I don't want us to get stuck in only lamenting that which has happened in the past or is currently happening. I want us to learn as the people of God, like Jesus, to look to the future still. And it can be looking to the future with this angst, with this groaning, as we'll see, but it is future thinking. That is, we don't get stuck in just lamenting. We lead with lament, but then we long out loud. LOL. You hear Ty making a lot of noises up here, which I appreciate. She's actively listening. But for a long time, yeah, she's doing it right now. Do it a little bit louder. Lol. She always would say lol in meetings. And, Tylene, grew up in the Philippines and Malaysia. And so I didn't know, maybe it's just like a thing she did there. And so there was a long time I didn't say anything. She keeps going, lol. And I was like, what? It was like I didn't know what it was. This isn't in the notes, but I just hear you doing it. I remember I was like, oh, but I can't say anything. That'd be rude. But finally I asked, what are you doing? What noises are you making? And she was like, oh, I'm saying laugh out loud. I'm going, LOL. You're going, oh, lol. I was like, oh. Now I know it, but I remember the time, there was a long time where I was just like, she keeps making weird grunting sounds. Okay. Okay, so we're going to reclaim lol, and we're going to long out loud, okay? So Jesus does this for us. He both leads with lament and he longs out loud. So we want to learn how to do that. So I want to read for you what's actually on the website because I'm going to actually spend less time talking about the way it's written here and more time talking about a couple of these passages where I see this done in really unique ways. But I want to read it because one of the things that inspired us to write this is leading with lament, longing out loud, is an amazing way to connect with the world around you, to connect with coworkers, to connect with family, even if those people have many different views or opinions than you have. And so you'll hear it as I read the definition here. But in a lot of ways, this was written as how do we engage even in public discourse, particularly around things like politics or things such as that. And lead with lament is a great way to do that. So hopefully you hear that as it comes out. I won't spend much time talking about politics, but hopefully you hear how it comes out here. Okay, so it's from the website, Lead with Lament. Newsflash. We live in a broken world. This includes every aspect of private and public life. Every institution, every organization is laced with defects of the fall. Nothing is untouched by the effects of sin. So this is clear biblical teaching that when humanity turned from God and went their own way, that's called the fall, that sin affected every part of private and public life. That's what I'm trying to say here. Therefore, we should never be surprised or confused when controversy and conflict erupts between human beings. Because in their own power, when they try to make sense of the world and apply fixes to the brokenness, they will always fall short. Apart from the guidance of the Scriptures and God's Spirit, all endeavors will fall short of creating the desire in our heart, and they will actually create something new, which is competing factions. Every time. Because that's how brokenness works. Okay, I'll continue. Because the brokenness is far deeper than all of us imagine, the solution must be more God-sized than all of us admit. Timetables must be longer than any of us would like, and the proper starting points are difficult to discern. As such, a perfect place to start any conversation around broken realities and best strategies is lament. It's a great place to start. Lament is a uniquely biblical activity of expressing sadness and grief that is present when we see the world as it is. It is not despair or hopelessness, and it is not assigning blame. It is simply crying out loud in the face of the reality of brokenness. By leading with lament, we do not allow politics, cultural ideologies, or pop morality to define our connections, but the lament itself. Brokenness affects us all and therefore has the opportunity to create unity around a shared experience of hardship and sorrow. Lament is the shared affirmation, simply making public the hurt we are all experiencing. So once we have connected over our shared awareness of the problems that got us to thinking about solutions in the first place, we can begin to offer our well-considered opinions on moving towards life and light. This is where paths may diverge, but our shared lament helps divergence not destroy oneness. Moreover, the gospel story implores us to consider the lengths God chose to go to provide a viable path from lament to life for us. So wherever possible, we should strive to bring similarly God-inspired ideas into our public conversations. This will often take the form of longing out loud for the world of equality, kindness, freedom, and truth that Jesus' death and resurrection made possible. These external and audible longings are soul-level groanings that move us along from grief to hope and allow us to share each other's burdens and dreams until the day of fulfillment, whenever that may come, in this life or the next. So that's from the website. That's how we've described it. And I want to now drill down a little deeper into a couple aspects of this, both lament and longing. And I'm going to do that now. So if you had turned there, we're going to be now reading from John chapter 11. Okay, John 11. Again, that's on page 953 if you're reading from the church Bibles here. So what we're going to see here is an example of how a follower of Jesus leads with lament, longs out loud, and how that connects her both to God through Jesus and also connects Jesus to other people surrounding her that have proximity to her story and her longing. And it's a beautiful example of this principle working itself out in the world and how it really isn't just about the lamenter, but also about all those who witness the lament, which is being sad out loud. Okay, you ready? So this is John chapter 11, starting in verse 17. The context here is that Jesus is really good friends with three siblings. Lazarus is the brother, Mary and Martha are the sisters, and Lazarus has actually died of an illness or a sickness. And they had tried to send word to Jesus when he was sick before he died so he could come and heal. So they have incredible faith. They've seen Jesus heal, and yet Jesus takes his time, doesn't get there before he dies. It's all quite confusing to them. Why didn't God show up when I prayed, when I called to him? And we don't know that. So I also preached a whole sermon on this passage back in our John series. You can go back and listen to a different aspect, because I'm going to be focusing on one very specific aspect, which is the way that Mary laments, leads with lament, and longs out loud. But there's so much more to be said about this passage. So let's go ahead and read it, and I'll pause as we go when necessary. So, verse 17, John chapter 11. When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus has already been in the tomb for 4 days. Bethany, the city of Bethany, the town of Bethany, was near Jerusalem, less than 2 miles away. Many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them about their brother. As soon as Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went to meet him, but Mary remained seated in the house. Then Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died." You hear the lament from Martha. She's got no problem saying what sometimes we feel we shouldn't say to God. Where were you? Yet even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you. Great faith. And Jesus told her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha said to him, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day, at the end of human history." That's what the Jews believed, or some of the Jews. But Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me, even if he does die, will live. Everyone who lives, believes in me, who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?" "Yes, Lord," she told him. "I believe you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who comes into the world." So she goes away. She actually goes back to the house. So now we're in verse 28. Having said this, Martha went back and called her sister Mary, saying in private, "The teacher is here, and he is calling for you." As soon as Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still in the place where Martha had met him. The Jews were with her, that's with Mary, in the house, consoling her, and they saw that Mary got up quickly and went out. Now make a note here, underline it, do whatever you need to do. We'll come back to this. They followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to cry there. To underline that, we're going to come back to that. Supposing that she was going to the tomb to cry there. Verse 32. As soon as Mary came to where the tomb? No. Came to where Jesus was and said to him, and saw him, she fell at his feet and told him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died." See the lament? Just like her sister. "Where were you? My brother wouldn't have needed to die if you had just been here." So she laments out loud. She leads with lament. She doesn't say, "Hey, Jesus, nice to see you." She just goes straight at him. And when Jesus saw her crying, and the Jews who had come with her crying, he was deeply moved in his spirit and troubled. "Where have you put him?" Jesus asked. "Lord," they told him, "come and see." And the shortest verse in the Bible, verse 35, Jesus wept. He wept. He lamented with them. Publicly, visibly, everybody could see Jesus weeping over the death of his friend Lazarus. So the Jews said, those just watching, those who were strangers in some regard to Jesus, saw this, and they said, see how he loved him, how he loved Lazarus. But some of them saw the same thing and said, couldn't he who opened the blind man's eyes have kept this man, his friend Lazarus, from dying? So some of them lead with lament, but then turn that lament into anger. Some of them see his lament and see the heart of God. Okay, verse 38. Then Jesus, deeply moved again, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. "Remove the stone," Jesus said. Martha, the dead man's sister, told him, "Jesus, Lord, there is already a stench because he has been dead for 4 days. You don't need to do that. He's been dead a long time. You don't want to go in there." Jesus said to her, "Didn't I tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they removed the stone. Then Jesus raised his eyes and said, "Father, I thank you that you heard me. I know that you always hear me, but because of the crowd standing here, I said this, so that they may believe you sent me." And he said this. He shouted with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, bound hand and foot with linen strips, and with his face wrapped in a cloth. And Jesus said to them, "Unwrap him and let him go." So this is an incredible story of the power of God, sort of the pinnacle of Jesus' revelatory signs that he is in fact sent by God, that he is who he says he is. He even has power over life and death because he says, "I am the resurrection and the life." So I can't preach that whole sermon about what that means, that Jesus is the resurrection and life. You're going to have to go listen back to that in our John series. But I wanted to point out a couple things that we see here. The first is you heard the lament, right? If you were just here, what's happened in the past wouldn't have happened. And God records this for us. Not as chastisement for Mary or Martha. That part of what they said was fine. They were bringing their sadness out loud to Jesus. And then we see their sadness becomes Jesus' sadness. We see Jesus weeping with those who weep. We see him sorrowful with those who are sorrowful. Even though he knows, I think he's already made up his mind what he's going to do. He's going to raise him from the dead. But he still weeps. He still leads with lament because it's sad what's happened. Just because something else will happen in the future, just because it won't always be like this, just because this hardship won't last forever, doesn't mean that you don't weep with those who weep. This is what's so important about lead with lament. So often, I think Christians can sometimes be the worst at this, is that we move straight to the platitudes. Straight to the, yes, but he's coming again. Yes, but you'll see him again. Yes, but heaven is better than this. Well, it's still incredibly sad to lose someone. It's still incredibly painful to go through hardship. It's incredible. Like, you don't have to just move straight to, but look what, we know what will happen. You live in the sadness with the people of God. That's what you do. That's what Jesus did. We need to get better at it. We need to not be those friends who just move straight to the hope, but we can sit in the sadness. And why do we want to move straight to the hope? Even if the hope is true, that's good. You might be helping them, but we want to move there usually because we are uncomfortable sitting in the sadness. We don't actually want their sadness to become our sadness. We don't want their weeping to become our weeping. I got enough weeping of my own. And Jesus shows us here, he teaches us here, don't lead with the hope, lead with lament. This world is broken. Life is hard. Suffering is real. And Jesus came to fix it all. But you got to stop, you got to pause, you got to live in it long enough that your weeping matches their weeping. Because, look what happens. Because Jesus laments with Mary, those watching see what? I mentioned it, the heart of God. The heart of God. God is not indifferent to our sadness. And because of it, at the end of this story, you actually see that many people make a decision to believe in Jesus, to choose to follow him. They say, that is the Son of God. I want to follow him. Not everyone. Some get angry. Some can't get past the lament. They can only see the brokenness. They can't see that God has come to step into it. But many do come to see that this must be God. This is the heart, the true heart of our Creator. So Jesus laments with them. And there's a really fascinating thing that he says. Did you pick that up? He says, Father, I thank you that you heard me. And then in verse 42 he says, I know that you always hear me, but because of the crowd standing here, I said this out loud. Isn't that interesting? Jesus God, we're talking. I know we're talking. I know you know my heart. I know you know my desire. I know you know that what I want to do is raise Lazarus from the dead. I know that's your heart too. I know we have this thing, but I'm going to say it out loud because something is important about saying it out loud. And the thing that's important is it gathers other people into the story. And so Jesus says, that's why I'm saying it out loud. And of course, God the Father knows that's why he's saying it out loud. And so he's even saying that's why he's saying it out loud, because I think he wants us to be talking today about why we say it out loud. Isn't that interesting? Jesus wants to make aware this private relationship that he has with the Father. He wants to make that public so that people can know, as a human being, I too can have a relationship with the Father. So this is one of the huge reasons why, as the people of God, we must learn to lead with lament, which is an out loud, acoustic blast of our deep longing and desire, our sadness, our frustration, that when we say it out loud, somehow it teaches those around us, you can talk to God like this. God cares about these kinds of things. God is there and he is listening and he hears. So there's something very important about this, and it's baked right in here. Jesus teaching us, as he's doing this thing, about the out loudness of lament and longing. Yes, of course you can lament and long. Of course you can be sad just in your prayer life with God. But if when a friend asks you, how are you doing? All you ever have to say is, pretty good, I'm great, Jesus is risen. If that's all you ever say, I think you are actually moving out of step with Jesus himself, who says that there is a reason and a purpose for outlouding our lament, outlouding our sadness, outlouding our longing. And it doesn't have anything to do with you. You might have a great relationship with God. He might know exactly where your heart is at. You might have that's going, and he says, now I want you to take that public. We'll say, why? I wouldn't want to bring everybody down with the hard things I'm going through. And he says, you don't understand. Even your hard things aren't only about you. Say it out loud. So Jesus does. He prays out loud. He longs out loud for God to raise up Lazarus. And Lazarus walks out of the tomb. And so think then, what happens? As Lazarus walks out now, all of these people are connected to the story that's happening. And they're connected in a true way, meaning they understand where the power is coming from. They're understanding that whatever happens next, God is going to do through Jesus. And it beautifully pulls the whole community there together. So that's what is happening. Mary laments and longs out loud, which connects her to Jesus, and then by proxy connects her to the Father, God the Father. Then Jesus laments and longs out loud, which connects the watching people to Jesus, Well, in fact, you could actually say Mary's lamenting and longing out loud are the first reason why the crowd is even following her to where she's going. And then Jesus lamenting and longing out loud connects those who are watching on with Jesus himself and by proxy to God the Father. And so then, when Lazarus walks out, the celebration can ensue, which is shared by who? All. It's shared by all. It's not just Mary who gets to celebrate. It's not just Jesus who gets to celebrate. But the celebration in full can be shared by all because the longing and lamenting have happened corporately, publicly. You say, like, well, they probably would have been pretty excited anyhow to see somebody being raised from the dead. Yes, but only as a spectator to see the spectacular. Only as a spectator to see the spectacular. And God doesn't want us to just celebrate sickness to health, death to life, only as spectators of the spectacular. He wants us to celebrate it as family. So if you don't weep with those who weep, your celebration, when the things you've prayed for come to pass, you will only celebrate as a spectator, not as a participant. Does that make sense? You see have you had this experience? Share that experience in your cohort this week of when you chose to enter into the lamenting, the weeping. When you entered in, then when the celebration came, the celebration felt totally different. I mean, you see this in sporting events, right? There's like a kind of celebration that happens for the crowd, and then there's a whole different kind of celebration that happens with those on the team. They've put in the hard work. They've suffered. They've bled. They've sweat. Their celebration, it may seem the same. Everybody's happy, but that kind of deep happiness, that deep joy that those on the team have is totally different than the fans who are just spectating. God wants that to be true in the game of life as well. Okay. So imagine how different that would have been if Mary hadn't brought her deep lament out loud, if Jesus hadn't brought his deep lament and longing to the world out loud. How different would that be? This is what is most important about this principle. That might not be obvious, but I'm trying so hard to make it obvious. It's not just about learning to let your grief sit and hold its place in your life. That's important. You can't skip the process of grieving. But it is about making all of that, to at least certain people, public. And I don't mean public like posting on social media. I mean like actually sitting across and telling somebody what's wrong in your life, what hurts in your life, what you're longing for in your life. And the public expression, letting other people actually into your life, life is sorrow, into your sorrow, is the most critical piece of the atmosphere of this principle. That is the atmosphere part of it. Weep with those who weep, mourn with those who mourn. And this is why 1/3 of the Psalms, which we teach every summer, the Psalms, 150 songs, poems, prayers written down for us that were then recited by, learned by, shared by, often put to music by the people of God, 1/3 of those are songs of lament. Okay, well, why would you take somebody's private crying out to God and put music to it and sing it all together? Because this principle has been true, that God wants us to weep together, not just celebrate together. So 1/3 of the songs are going to be kind of sad songs. This is also why there's a whole book called the Book of Lamentations. So why do you need to record those? Those are in the past. Because learning how to lament as the people of God will teach us how to long for the things of God. Why do we have the prophets? Read the Old Testament, there's just a lot of prophets, and they seem real angry, and somebody wrote it down. It's like, well, why did God want that to happen? The prophets are a huge thing the prophets are doing are leading with lament. Israel, what have you done? What are you doing? Why aren't you worshiping God? Why aren't you putting him in the center? They're lamenting out loud, and then they're longing for a future. Oh, I long for this future where the lion and the lamb laid down together and all the swords are turned into plowshares. I long for that future where war is gone. You see, that's all the prophets are doing. And God said, I want you to write that down so that all of my people can lead with lament and long out loud together. That's why we read the Psalms, we read the prophets, we read the book of Lamentation. Because God's told us, I want this stuff public. This isn't just private stuff. It may start private, but I want you to take it to a friend. Take it to your family. Take it to your spouse. Am I making my point? Is it clear? Now, I just did this the other day with a friend of mine. He goes to church here, so you could try to figure out who it is. And I asked him, I said to said friend, I'm going to try so hard not to say his name. I said, what are you most lamenting in your life right now? And he told me about a sibling that he has. A sibling who, for a time, was worshiping with the people of God and who has left. And as he lamented out loud, it forced me to ask more questions. Tell me more about your sibling. Tell me more about, see, I'm trying so hard not to say her or him. What's your sibling, how'd they get to this point? Like, what happened? And I got to hear so much of the story. And as he was lamenting and then longing out loud, you know what started to happen to me? I never met this person. You know, I said to him, do you have a picture of this person, of your sibling? And he shows me a picture of his sibling. I was like, oh, man. And my heart is like, I never met this person. I only met this brother from our church just less than a year ago. And I find myself connected to this story, and I find myself, even after a meeting, I'm praying for his sibling, and I'm hoping for a moment that maybe we could give them a different picture, experience of what the people of God have liked, because part of her lament is what she experienced in the church. Oh, I wish that we could just gather her in with us. You see it? The heart of God is now activated in me, and now I care about all your siblings, not as much as I care about his. Because he longed out loud with me. He led with lament. I'm going to tell you, this person, I don't think this is natural for this person. You'd meet this person, you say, this person is quite positive. So he was practicing it with me, in part because I asked him to practice this with me. But now I will be praying for his sibling. I will be asking God. I will be lamenting what his sibling experienced. I will be doing all that because he opened up. Okay. I hope you try this. Takes two to tango. Takes somebody to ask the hard question, what are you most lamenting right now? Takes somebody to actually answer with honesty. Okay, so one more thing about this passage that stands out. Go back now to that verse 31 that I had you underline. Look at that with me again. Verse 31. It says, the Jews who were with Mary in the house, consoling her, they saw that Mary got up quickly and went out. So they followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to cry there. Why is this so interesting to me? Well, Dave, you're kind of strange, and things interest you that don't interest most people. That's part of the answer. But I thought, well, then you got to ask, well, why did John write this down? Right? This is sort of a part of the story. The story's not about the Jews who were gathered around Mary watching her lament, right? Well, clearly, John doesn't think that's unimportant. He keeps referencing them. So that's the first thing you should notice. Why does John keep referencing this crowd that's around them? Well, it's common when somebody dies that there's lots of people around. They're just kind of in the background, and John wants to pull them into the story as a character in the story. Why? Because Jesus did that, right? Jesus says, hey, I want you to pay attention to why I'm praying out loud. So John's like, well, maybe something else is going on. And he pulls out this little detail. So he was maybe in the crowd, perhaps, hearing them all saying, oh, I know where she's going. She's going out to the tomb to weep there, to cry over the grave of her lost loved one. This is so common, right? Like, of course that's where she's going. Yes, of course that's where she's going. Of course, where else would she go when she's weeping? Where else do you go when you lose a loved one, when you've buried them in the ground? Of course. Where would you go? Well, she didn't go there. Where did she go? She went to the feet of Jesus. Right here we have a cosmic shift in the way people weep, the way people mourn, the way people grieve the loss of a loved one. The world goes to the gravesite. The followers of Jesus run to the feet of the resurrection and the life. And it's happening right here, and John is highlighting it for us. He's saying, don't miss this. Mary, she sets us on a new course. It's totally natural to think, I'll go to the graveside and pray. But she's got somewhere better to go. And that's to lament. Again, not just hope and dream and platitude with Jesus, to lament and weep with Jesus. And it's a beautiful shift. Mary is now modeling for us how to go from weeping to worship. That's what Jesus changed in the world. Our weeping can draw us into worship of the resurrection and the life. I love that. I've never seen that. If you go back and listen to me preach this, just a few months ago in John 11, you won't hear me talk about that. Why? I didn't see it then. This is why you read the Bible over and over and over and over again. There's so much. It's an endless mine of glory. I never saw that till this week. I literally called Ryan. I said, Ryan. He didn't pick up, actually, so I sent a text. I said, Ryan, call me as soon as you get this. I saw something I've never seen before. He says, are you okay? I said, yeah. He says, I'm in a meeting. I said, fine. Call me right after. He called me, and he goes, whoa, I never saw that. It's like a real episode of Seinfeld around here. Can you believe this? She doesn't go where everybody supposed she was going. She goes somewhere else. And you may have noticed this. You may have noticed how Christians seem to do funerals different than non-Christians. Mary taught us the way. Story is not over. For those who know Jesus Christ, the resurrection and the life. I love that. Okay. One last passage to look at here. And this one is a little more geared towards longing out loud, though it has lament in it as well. So you can turn there with me if you want to Romans chapter 8. Romans chapter 8. I'm going to read it, and we'll have it on the screen too. Romans chapter 8. That is the letter written by the Apostle Paul to the church in Rome. And it's just a few pages past John. You got to get through the book of Acts, which is right after John's gospel. Acts talks about the rise of the Jesus movement, the beginning of the church. And then Romans is the first letter we have recorded for us here. Now in Romans is a great book. A great, deep. You got to read it slow. But it's amazing. And if you get to chapter 8, you hear the Apostle Paul begin to talk about what it means to be adopted into the family of God. So I don't want you to miss this, because this sermon series is a lot about, okay, how do we live out the gospel in the real world? And so if you're not yet a Christian in the room, and we're so glad that you're here, because that's a huge reason why we exist, is to introduce people to the real Jesus, help them understand who he really is, because you have a decision to make. Do you want to follow him? And one of the things I want you to hear is both what we said, that God's heart and desire for you is to gather you in under his wings, which is to mean to make you part of his family. And here again in Romans 8, we see that same declaration, that God wants to adopt you into his family so that you are a son or daughter of the Most High King. And it's totally different than maybe what you thought religion was. Christianity is not about a set of rules to follow, things to do, so that maybe you can be good enough, that maybe God lets you into some private club at the end of time. It has nothing to do with that. The good news, Christianity is all about God saying, I have chosen you to gather you into a family that I will live with and love on for all eternity, regardless of what you've done, despite who you are, despite your bad habits. Despite all that, I want to gather you in and adopt you. So I just love this picture, because one of my favorite things to think about as Christianity is that we are all orphans. We are all fatherless. And God can declare to you today that he has chosen you to adopt. He has signed the paperwork necessary. And part of life in this world, and part of why it's difficult and struggle, is that for whatever reason, even though the documents are signed, legally you are part of God's family, there is still a gap before he comes and picks you up. And he's going to tell us why he does that, right here in this passage. And it's not just because you need some transformation. It's because he wants to leave you in the orphanage so that you can tell everybody else about this Father who will choose you even though you're the least likely to be chosen. Let's read it. Romans 8, verse 14 to 26 says this. For all those led by God's Spirit are God's sons. Now, he means sons and daughters, but sons is important because in that day and age, the first son got the inheritance. So whether you're male or female in the room, you are a son of God in that you get the inheritance of God. Just want you to know that. For you did not receive a spirit of slavery to fall back into fear. Instead, you received the spirit of adoption, by whom we cry out, Abba, Father. The Spirit himself testifies together with our spirit that we are God's children, and if children, also heirs, heirs of God and heirs, co-heirs with Christ, if indeed we suffer with him, so that we may also be glorified with him. Wow. Oh, it's so hard not to just keep preaching on that. Okay, so Abba, Father, which is actually how children cry out to their parents. And what are children particularly good at doing with their parents? This is what Paul's saying. He's saying, you can now refer to God not as, oh, dear Sir God, if it is in your will, might you perhaps. If you have kids, you know they don't talk to you like that. Though I try to teach them, call me sir. Father, dear Father. I just want them to call me Father sometime. Dad, get here. Okay. But they call me Dad. And you know what they do so well? My kids know how to lead with lament. Dad! My cereal's so soggy. Get me new cereal. It's like, yeah, because you're playing with your Legos when you should have been eating. Eat it. No. Kids know how to lead with lament. And they know how to long out loud to their dads. God's saying, that's what I want you to be like. To cry, Abba, Father, my cereal's soggy. You say like, well, I probably shouldn't bring that one to God. God says, bring it all to me. I'll decide whether I give you new cereal or not. Bring it all. What are you lamenting? Like serious, bring it all to him. You don't need to filter it. And then Paul goes on to say this in verse 18. For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is going to be revealed to us. Now this is so key. You might read this and you think, oh, see, Paul's saying, don't talk about your suffering. Don't talk about your soggy cereal, because you can't understand how good cereal is going to be in heaven. He's saying that, right? This is it. This is where I go to say, this is why I don't lead with lament. Because Paul said, don't compare the sufferings of this life to the glory that is to come for all of us. Is that what he's saying? Now, I want to read this quote because I think this is beautiful. Teresa of Avila wrote this a couple hundred years ago. She said, this is how she interpreted this passage, which I think is true. And she says this, in light of heaven, the worst sufferings on earth will be seen to be no more serious than one night in an inconvenient hotel. Paul is saying that if you just put it on the scales, the worst possible suffering you could have in this life compared to the eternal glories of being with God, it's like one inconvenient night in a hotel. That is actually true, objectively true, but that doesn't mean what Paul is saying then, stop complaining. He's not saying that. Now, how do I know that? Let's keep reading. What does he say next? He says, for the creation, earth itself, the planet itself, the tectonic plates itself, eagerly wait with anticipation for God's sons, that's men and women who are heirs with God, to be revealed. For creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it. Because of sin, it was subjected to futility. Because of sin, it was subjected to brokenness. Because of sin, the earth shakes and quakes, and tsunamis flood. Verse 21, that the creation itself will also be set free from the bondage to decay into the glorious freedom of God's children. For we know that the whole creation has been groaning together with labor pains until now. First, it's amazing to know that creation leads with lament. That creation longs out loud with us. That creation groans for the fulfillment of God's promises and plans. Did you know that? All of creation does that. And so the reason that I know that Paul's not saying, stop complaining, is because he goes on to say, even the creation complains. It's hard out here. It's broken out here. It's not as it should be out here. Even creation knows it deep down. So Paul's not saying, stop doing that. He's just saying, when you do that, also know that comparatively, the glory that's coming, you're going to like the way you look. You're going to like the way you feel. You're going to like, and he's saying it to creation and to us. And so he's not chastising. He's not telling creation to stop groaning, so he's surely not telling us to stop groaning. And then he continues. Verse 23. Not only that creation groans, but we ourselves have the Spirit as the first fruits. We also groan within ourselves, eagerly waiting for adoption. We're waiting for him to come pick us up from the orphanage. Like, we're excited about that day. We're excited for the redemption of our bodies, which is to say we long for these broken bodies that just war against us to be turned into these heavenly bodies, these resurrected bodies. That is the promise of God. And then verse 24 says, now in this hope we were saved, but hope that is seen is not hope. We can't see it yet. That's why we hope for it. That's why we long for it. Because who hopes for what he sees? Now, if we hope for what we do not see, we eagerly wait for it with patience. This is longing out loud. I think he's talking about hoping out loud with one another. We eagerly wait for it with patience. So this is the key. Why do we long out loud? Because part of longing out loud gives us the endurance to wait faithfully, lovingly, which is what he's getting at. He's like, when you feel the aches and the pains and the brokenness of the world, don't throw a fit. Hope together, long together, and it will give you patience to endure in a way that is faithful to everything else God's called you to do. That's why we long out loud, because I can't hold all this longing I have in me by myself. Not even creation can hold all that longing by itself. We need to long with creation. We need to long with one another, and that somehow gives us this patience that then makes us witnesses to the glory and goodness of God even now, even while we wait for the glory to come. Verse 26, in the same way, the Spirit also helps us in our weakness, because we do not know what to pray for as we should, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us with inexpressible groanings. So the Spirit helps us to groan and long out loud. And I just love that idea of groaning to God. The Greek word there means literally sigh. And I bring that up only to say groaning is not a thought. It's a physical expression. It's a letting go of air that's in your mouth. You're holding it all in. You're holding your lament. You're holding it in because you don't want to be the negative Nancy in the room. You're holding it in, and God says, sigh it out. Even if you don't have the words, groan it out. Let it out. Don't hold on to it yourself. We hold on to each other's sufferings and longings together. It's the only way that they don't crush us in this world. That's the church. This is the plan of God. For whatever reason, he allows us to sit in the pain and the groaning and the suffering of this life, but he doesn't ask us to sit alone. He asks us to sit together and hold it all together. That is his plan. That is his plan. So a few caveats to close. As you're expressing out loud your groanings, your laments, and even your longings for the future, remember these two things. Lamenting should not be your constant state. You lead with lament. That's why we say lead with lament, not never stop longing. Or you never stop lamenting. No, you lead with lament, and then you move to longing, and you move to worship, but you don't get stuck there. And so often we can get stuck in just lamenting. And sometimes we get stuck in there because it's how we connect with people. And so you're like, oh, I really only connect with people when I'm leading with lament. Don't sit there. Like, think of great musicians who are really good at writing lament songs. They need to also write some upbeat ballads too. Like, don't get stuck there. That's not the only way you have to connect with your fandom, okay? So don't get stuck there. Lamenting should lead to longing. Longing should lead to worship. Number 2, don't learn to lament every part of everything. So God's people are asking God to give them eyes to see. The Spirit that helps you, that we just read about, will help you lead with lament about the right things to lament about. We want to see brokenness as God sees brokenness. So we don't want to call broken something that's working well. An example of this is lamenting the church itself. It is good to lament the church. The church is a human institution that's broken in many ways. But if you lament every part of the church, in part because maybe you're like, oh, I'm really connecting now with this person when as a pastor, I like to do this, lament the church with other people. Like, you're a pastor, you're lamenting? Yeah, there's a lot broken. That's why we're here to help. We're here to fix. But I don't want to lament the parts of the church that aren't actually broken. So like evangelism is not a part of the church that's broken. Maybe the way we share the gospel is broken, but not sharing the gospel itself. And so you want to learn to lament the right parts of the thing, not just every part of the thing. God will give you eyes to see which part of this thing need lamenting. And then I'm going to ask you finally to practice. Learn to lament and long with one another. Learn to do what I did, to sit down and say, what in your life right now are you lamenting the most? And if they struggle to answer that question, ask them the next question, which goes like this. What in your life are you longing most for? And then I want you to teach them this. Some people can only connect with their longings, and they say, well, this is what I'm longing for. Every longing is connected to a lament. So maybe they can't answer, I'm not really lamenting anything. What are you longing for? Oh, I'm longing for this. What is it in your life that you're lamenting, or thing in the past that you're lamenting that has led to that longing? And you can help them, if they struggle with this, to walk back and lead with lament. It's a great way to get into this with one another, because lamenting and longing are both important. Help each other open up. Help each other reveal the ways that God has revealed the brokenness in the world and how they're experiencing that, and help them either learn to lament if they're bad at that, or learn to long if they tend to get stuck in the lament. And then together we can, as a community, share the burdens. Weep with those who weep. Celebrate with those who celebrate. All together, all for God's glory. Let's pray.